Happy New Year and welcome back to Taylor Time Live. I'm Seth Gladden, your host, and we have some exciting stuff planned this year. So what we're going to do for this year is focus on commercial, builder, and multifamily markets and giving you what we call the insider's view or behind the scenes look at those markets. So really any ways that we can help with those is going to be our focus this year. So we're excited about that. This episode is our first one this year, obviously. It's called Building a Successful 2021, where we want to lay the foundation not only for a successful 2021, but also for the rest of this year for us and what we're going to be talking about to help you make sure that you can maximize profit and minimize risk. And hopefully you'll be able to find that information here with the experts that we bring in and the topics that we cover. So today we have an exciting program for you. We're going to be talking about how to build a successful 2021. And so our agenda today is pretty simple. We're going to be looking at some of the key changes that have affected our industry over the last 5, 10, 20 years, some of them, and some of them even this last year. We all know the challenges that have happened there. So we'll be talking about some of those key challenges and changes. Then we're going to be looking at upcoming trends and what to expect as we move through the rest of this year and forward. And then at the end, so don't miss this part, because at the end, the last section we're going to talk about is keys to success. So how we think you can be more successful and find new creative ways to increase your business and maximize profit and minimize risk. So stay tuned with us. We're excited, and we hope that you join not just this one and stay with us, but also the remainder of the year. So joining me today, I've got 3 experts with me. Gary Scheidker is here with me in studio. Gary's our Director of Technical Services for Taylor. Thanks for being here, Gary.
Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Another year, right?
Yes, sir.
That's right.
Every day above ground's a good one for me.
There you go. Well, that's a good statement. And then joining us remotely, we've got Robert Varden with CFI, the Executive Director. Robert, thanks for being here.
Hey, Seth. Absolutely excited to be here. I certainly appreciate it. This, of course, is an exciting segment for me because that's kind of where I grew up in, is on the commercial side of the business with the commercial workrooms in the Dallas and the San Francisco area. So, no, it's a pretty exciting segment. So, Seth, Tom, Gary, kind of looking forward to it, guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Robert, and definitely looking forward to some of the expertise that you have to offer. And then we have a special guest joining us today, which is Tom Cartmel from Diversify. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Seth. I really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've been in the commercial industry in floor covering my whole life. I started in 1975 as an installer. Everything I could to learn everything I could, and ended up running a large school district on all their floor covering here in Indianapolis, which was Indianapolis Public Schools.
Okay.
They had 113 campuses, which was pretty much all relays and things of that nature. And then I ended up becoming a tech rep for Mohawk Commercial for quite a few years. And wife got tired of the travel, got tired of me traveling, so I ended up going back to work for where I started out as an installer, as a salesperson, account executive. And I stayed there for 14 years and then had the opportunity to come to Diversify. That time it was called Mr. David's. Now we're Diversify Plus. So I run the branch here in Indianapolis as a branch sales manager. So
very good.
I'm also on the board of directors for the WFCA and the Indiana Floor. I'm the president of the Indiana Floor Covering Association here in Indianapolis.
Wow. Yeah. So you know a little bit about flooring and about our industry, it sounds like. So that's why we're so excited to have you here today with us. So thank you again for joining. Well, let's go ahead and look at some of the changes. Obviously, to be able to build a successful future, so much of that is going to come from learning from the past and using those trends, using that to figure out how to move forward successfully. So when we're talking about that and some of those changes, Tom, would you mind starting us off with a little bit of the changes that have happened just on flooring materials alone over the last few years?
Yeah, I think the most obvious is the the slowdown of broadloom. You know, they lost a lot of market share over quite a few years now, but especially the last 5. But the one that gets my attention the most, I believe, is, you know, the increase in LVT, but also the different vinyl products. We're really seeing some unique and advanced vinyl products, which relates into advanced and unique installation, you know, procedures.
Yeah.
Some of the carpet tile now is even made out of, you know, the face yards are vinyl. So a lot of changes, a lot of stuff to get used to. Specifications are changing a lot. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Robert and Gary, what have you guys seen as far as changes in just flooring materials alone that you think are key drivers?
I'll start.
Yeah.
Really the big change has gone to hard surface. You know, like Tom had mentioned, LVT and LVP have become more and more important. And the flooring contractors that were not worried about testing for moisture before, now they have to test for moisture because they're working with a product that is moisture sensitive.
Yeah.
Moisture, alkalinity, and substrate preparation are totally different for hard surface than they are for soft surface.
Yeah. And as we've looked at, last year we had an episode on moisture, and I'm sure we'll touch that topic again because it's a very small topic. So
yeah, it's our biggest issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you'd like to add on just the flooring materials, Robert? And then just bear in mind for all those.
Well, yeah, you know.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, you know, kind of like Tom and both Gary said. I mean, you know, that transition from the broadloom either to the carpet tile or and some of those carpet tiles I'd almost want to call vinyl tiles, you know, into that hard surface, and even that hard surface category itself. You know, I know, you know, we've got a lot of schools in the Texas area, you know, and a lot of them were, you know, typically those corridors were always a VCT, VCT, VCT. It seemed like just forever. And even a lot of those are transitioning to some of the LVT products, some of the plank products. One thing that we're seeing from this transition is, you know, I mean, when you're installing carpet typically, you know, will kind of hide a multitude of sins. You know, I'd say here at CFI, we've gotten more calls in the last year, maybe year and a half, 2 years, because what we're seeing, when we're seeing this transition, we're not seeing the guys keep up with the prep issues, as Gary said, the moisture issues. Right. Obviously, when you're prepping for hard surface, it takes a lot more prep than when you're prepping for safe carpet itself. So we're seeing a lot of prep issues as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, Robert, a lot of that, it starts with the salespeople. You know, the salespeople have to know exactly what they're bidding, what they're pricing, you know, to get that job started, to win the job. And, you know, typically they see carpet tile, they price carpet tile. You know, when the installer gets on the job, he's got a hold of something that he's never seen before, you know, that installs totally differently. So it's keeping up with the changes in the industry is very, very important.
And that's a great point. I mean, you know, just from the manufacturing side, those products are changing. And they're changing, it seems, especially on the hard surface side, at a, you know, more and more rapid pace, it seems, every day. And suddenly, you know, when I was an installer, I remember it's like, you know, suddenly we get to the job site, we roll out the roll, or we open up the box, and it's like, never seen this before. What do you do? You just, you know, it takes a lot more research, I think, on the front end these days. I mean, if you're a smart salesperson, project manager, I think you really got to do your research anymore.
Yeah. So looking at that, I mean, obviously flooring materials have had a huge impact the way that they've changed. You know, we've discussed everything from moisture testing to, you know, substrate prep, and we'll get to some of the ways to I guess plan ahead for those and how you can overcome that in our last section. But as we look at that, let's talk a little bit about specification process. And Tom, I think probably that one's best for you as well. But what are some of the big changes that you've seen in the specification process over the last several years?
Well, the specifications is, to me, the most important part of bidding a project or pricing a project. The specifications are going to have the details in there, you know, on what you have to do, what you have to price. But the change in the materials, those specifications are changing. We used to see a lot of just boilerplate specifications, you know, a lot of that for many years. Now most projects do have detailed specifications. And one of the biggest changes we've seen in the last couple of years is that you will have a prep section in those bidding documents that you didn't used to see. And now we're even seeing moisture mitigation sections in those And it's, you've got to know what it says to be able to price a job. And also with the specifications on just the carpet or the vinyl. When it's these hybrid products or these new products that call for different installation procedures or moisture or floor prep, that changes the cost and everything. So you've really got to know your products, and the specifications is where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that noticing those changes in, just like you said, being able to actually look at the documents, know what's in there so that you know how to bid the job, because otherwise you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you have a moisture mitigation spec and you don't see that in your bid. We all know how much money that can cost. So definitely some important stuff there. And that's interesting as that's changed. Obviously, regulations and compliance too have been a huge area of change over the last. I don't even know what time frame you'd put on it, but I mean it's an ever-changing.
It's gradual, but it's constantly changing.
Yeah. So Gary, do you want to talk a little bit about some of those regulations that you've seen change and just the big ones that have altered how we do flooring?
Yeah. Well, the big things, regulations as far as the compliance for government regulations. You get into crystalline silicate dust and things like that. Traditionally, flooring contractors would go in there with their floor grinder, the guys with their masks, they prep up a little bit, but now they have to take extra precautions to eliminate that crystalline silicate dust in the environment.
Right.
If they're working in an older structure, a building that was built prior to 1978, they have to test for lead before they start a remodel by law. So, and the fines can be substantial. They need to test for asbestos if there's any concerns about any of the floor covering containing asbestos. So those are always things to look for. And then we're looking at different components that have gone into the adhesives. There's going to be legislation being enacted in California and other states, I'm sure afterwards, eliminating isocyanates for consumer use. So for manufacturing, they can still be used because it's in a closed system and you can be protected.
Sure.
But if you're working in an environment where it's occupied, it's different.
You said a word, isocyanates. Do you mind explaining what is an isocyanate?
Isocyanates are commonly found in moisture-cured urethanes. We will see those in moisture-cured urethane adhesives for floor covering, moisture-cured finishes for floor covering, and then you'll see them in expansion foam and other coatings and things like that. Expansion foam in particular is very high in isocyanate content. It is the #1 cause of occupational related asthma, and it's also an asthma trigger. So if you have somebody that has a respiratory issue, it can be a particularly sensitive product for them.
Yeah, so when you say isocyanates, it's something to pay attention to for sure.
Definitely. And it varies according to where you're at. You have to look at what your state and your local legislation is and the regulations are, because it can vary dramatically throughout the state.
Yeah, and I think California specifically kind of leads the charge, not just on that, but on a lot of those
things.
Regulations. So yeah, pay attention to that, and we'll talk about that again in an upcoming section.
I mean, obviously, when you talk about those chemicals, and I'd have to look up how it's spelled, of course, but I mean, is that on the buckets? Is it something, if I'm an installer and I go, buy the normal adhesive I buy every week for whatever application, how will I know? I mean, are those still being produced at this point in time? I know California, you can't get them in there, but I mean, everywhere else, if I'm walking in, is it still available?
Yes. Yeah, actually, a good rule of thumb when it comes to isocyanate containing floor covering adhesives, urethanes, they'll be packaged in a metal container because of the isocyanate content. There are some moisture-cured urethane products that are out in plastic buckets now, but what they did is they changed the composition of the pail to be able to withstand the isocyanate content.
Yep.
So there are a lot of changes going on.
You need to read the ingredients.
You have to read the ingredients. SDS sheets, MSDS sheets are required by law. You actually should have them on job site. So you want to make certain that you're prepared. I'm certain other companies do it, but we actually have an app so they can have all of the SDS and TDS right there on hand, which really makes it simple for them. But today with the access of the accessibility of any kind of information like that, there's really no excuse not to have it. But they can always glance through and take a look and see if it does contain isocyanates.
Well, guys, unfortunately, most people don't know what an SDS sheet is. So,
well, it's
that could be a real problem. If you work in commercial, it's a serious problem.
It's the new version of the MSDS, right?
I was going to say, I remember back when I called it MSDS.
Yep. Yeah, they changed that 4 or 5 years ago, I think. So.
Right.
So yeah.
It's old guy like change.
And those documents should be accessible on any manufacturer's website. They should be easily accessible. I know they are on our website, for example. So anytime you need an SDS or a tech data sheet to learn more information about the product, always grab those, and that's super important as well. Obviously,
we cover
regulations.
those in training and so forth, and it's a shame. That's why I bring it up, that in most installers, they just usually don't kind of get to that point. But I just wanted to stress the importance of that. And again, being those chemicals are still out there, I wanted to make everyone aware they need to be looking for this stuff. I don't want them to be, watching the TV 10 years from now and suddenly there's all these lawsuits going on about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, they need to take the proper precautions now. If you're working with isocyanate containing materials, there will actually be warnings to wear eye protection, gloves, and respiratory protection while you're working with them. A lot of these chemicals are not just absorbed through your lungs; they'll also be absorbed through your skin. So surface contact to your skin can also be an issue.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I'm really glad that you said that, Gary, because again, as an installer and carrying about every installer out there, I don't know too many installers that are carrying respirators.
None of them.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And I wouldn't even have thought of that, Gary. So I appreciate that.
99% of
Wearing a
installers
hard hat.
have probably never heard of it. 99% of your installers have probably never heard of that.
Huh.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate fact, and I've talked to guys that sold for adhesive manufacturers, and in our discussion I bring it up and they say, oh no, that's not true, and I'll actually pull up their SDS sheet and it'll show them that you actually have to have it, but they never even bothered to look at their own SDS sheets. Which is kind of scary,
Yeah.
One of the things that we'll do here is, we research products for people, not other people's adhesives, obviously, but if we have to research a floor covering product or something like that, we're more than happy to do that for you, and we can make recommendations based on that as far as moisture limitations and things like that. So we're here to support you. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. That's and I know Robert feels the same. Anytime there's a question, our tech team is happy to handle it. I know Robert's happy to take those calls as well at CFI and help you in any ways that we can. So obviously, on top of regulations and compliance, we already talked about isocyanates, which kind of crosses over into that sustainability as well. Not only is it a regulation, but also it's something that sustainability is kind of pushing out of the way.
Yeah.
It's almost the new asbestos, right? Isocyanates. So, but other sustainability things. So what have you guys seen when it comes to LEED? Are there any major changes that have happened there, or VOCs, any of this sort of stuff that's made a major impact over the last few years?
Yeah, the VOC limitations have gotten stronger, especially you get into places like California. A lot of other states are starting to adopt the same type of legislation. We're actually seeing it on our side driven more by the floor covering manufacturers. The floor covering manufacturers see the writing on the wall, and they're trying to develop products anticipating these limitations and things like that. And it could be for VOC content, but also they're trying to get the LEED points for certification for buildings.
Yeah, and there's definitely that's an ever-changing landscape. So we'll talk about that probably a little more in trends as well.
The chatter I used to hear about VOCs, I don't hear as much. Most of the chatter here now usually pertains to even the asbestos stuff is kind of, you're not hearing as much chatter. Most of the chatter now we're hearing on silica, things such as that nature. We don't hear as much, at least on our end, is where we're getting the calls and we're having an issue and so forth. How about you, Tom? Are you?
VOCs is still in all the specs. That's one of the things you
right.
see in every specification for about anything. So yes, it's still very important to the end user, and that passes down.
Yeah, and then obviously all of these things we've been talking about as far as changes have been compounded by the installer shortage. And I'll give a quick plug here, and then we can talk about that a little bit. But if you missed our last Taylor Time Live in December, please go check it out on our YouTube channel. The whole thing was dedicated to the installer shortage crisis. We had Scott Humphrey from the WFCA here. We had Jeff Gordon from Fuse with us, as well as Robert Varden. So that was a great discussion, ways you can get involved, ways you can help. And so definitely check that out. That was our December Taylor Time Live. But speaking of that, let's go ahead and talk briefly about how just the labor shortage has changed our industry over the last few years. Don't talk about trends yet, though, because remember, our viewers need to stick with us for trends and then keys to success. So what have we seen change when it comes to the labor shortage?
Well, for us, it's just the people retiring. You constantly got people retiring, and not as many young people getting into the industry. It's created a huge problem, and it's going to continue to get worse if we don't do something about it.
Sure. So what does that look like, boots on the ground, though? Like, how has that changed? Does it change the way that you bid jobs, or the way that, the timeline for jobs? What are you seeing the impacts of that being in the industry?
Biggest impact for us is the scheduling. When we bid a job, it has a schedule on there. We have to be at a certain point, at a certain time, and we have to keep moving that job along. So it creates big issues, when you have a lot of jobs going, to meet all those schedules. That's the biggest thing. And then you got the quality. You've got quality concerns when you have to put less than what you'd want to out there.
Yeah.
And then if you run into overtime to keep those schedules, it gets very, very costly. So.
Yeah. And then I think on top of that labor shortage, right, is the thing that happened this last year, which is obviously COVID, and that's had a huge impact as well. So let's touch on that just briefly, and then we're going to move on to trends. But how have you guys seen? Because obviously on top of the labor shortage, then you've also got COVID. So what has that been like in the field? Robert, do you mind talking about that for a minute?
Well, just jumping back a little bit to the installer shortage part. One thing that's done, I don't know if many of you remember the research that the FCLC did a couple of years ago, and that research firm was actually able to quantify the loss. And that loss was in, 3 or 4 categories, as Tom mentioned, workmanship. Now, Tom is in a unique position with a the company the size of Diversify, and that with so many locations, so much manpower involved in that entire group, they can kind of move around and help accommodate. But you use your smaller commercial dealers that maybe have 1 location or even 2 locations remotely. They can't move those men around. So what happens is, not only quality issues, jobs not getting, they're not staffed properly, they're not getting done as when they're supposed to get done. I've heard contractors talk about the increase in cost from, sometimes you bid a job and that job is bid years out prior to it going. Well, now suddenly getting that labor they need for that project is costing them more simply because they can't get them at the price they paid 2 years ago. They're having to pay more for that labor, so they're running into cost issues. As far as COVID, I think mainly what that's done, I talked to a lot of contractors, obviously, and some of them said, just the way they're staffing the job. I know talked to a couple of guys that were on large projects that, that project used to, let's say the job site itself might have 300 men on it, and that's all the different trades at one time. Well, suddenly with the new CDC regulations, they came and said, oh no, because of distancing issues, because of the COVID issue, now you can only have half that many. So what they do is then they have to take the few men they have and split them up even more, because half of them go on the day shift and half of them go on the night shift.
Right.
So yeah, there's been impacts such as that. Obviously, some of them, they have to arrive at the job site at 7 a.m., get their temperature taken before they'll, make sure that they pass before they can even come onto the job site.
Sure.
I've heard a lot of different stuff in different areas of the country.
So
It'd be
Tom,
interesting to see what you say too.
Every project has their own regulations now for COVID. So you have to read through those. You have to adhere to all the regulations. Some of them are very stringent. The other thing you have is when COVID hits a project, with contact tracing, they might take everybody off of that job, or 75% of the people off of that job for 10 days. So now you're 10 days behind on the project. And of course, that contractor is still trying to meet his dates. And, so they're pushing, they want more men. But pretty much just the rules of a job anymore are unique per job.
Yeah.
But the contact tracing can throw a big clog in getting it.
And this week it hits the electricians and it clears the job. Next week it hits the plumbers and it clears the job.
Yeah, but they'll look at where those guys were at, and they went down through here several times where all the flooring guys were. So now the flooring guys have to leave.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing with us is just the COVID hit so fast. You put every company puts their business plan together, and they have a plan for the year, and they're focused on hitting that plan. COVID turned that upside down for a lot of companies. I mean,
Sure.
They're like I said, smaller or medium sized, or even the big ones. It was just so unexpected and hit so fast where we had to go remotely, and that was a big issue.
Yeah. Well, and we'll talk more about that as we see it moving forward, as well as ways to get around it. So I know that we've got some good ideas for you coming up. But let's go ahead and move on. But before we do, I just want to let you know, typically we're rolling a text-in number at the bottom and saying that we're going to answer questions. Our text-in service has reported an outage right now, so they are working on it. We use a third-party service for that. They're working on that, so hopefully they'll get that fixed. You can go ahead and text your questions in, though, so if you put that number up, if we do not receive them live, then we will be sure to respond to you. I'll get with Gary and the team here,
Yes.
and Robert and Tom, and we'll respond to you and just text you back, or if you include your email, we'll get to you that way. So we do still want to field your questions, and we hope that they come in before the end of this live, but just wanted to let you know. So let's go ahead and move on, though, and let's talk about some of the trends that we're seeing. So this is an exciting section, right? Because it's almost our crystal ball forecasting, so to speak. I don't know how accurate all of it's going to be, but between the experts that we have here, I feel like we have a pretty good view or perspective on what to expect, especially given the history that we have. So when we're looking at that, Robert, do you mind talking about what you think you see coming up as far as flooring materials?
I think you're going to see a continuation of the same. I think with the recycled component and that direction that the mills started going many years ago, and the lead points and they can get, and then with the design group and the architect firm, I think you're going to continue to see the drive toward that hard surface segment. I mean, obviously you've got people in manufacturing that they're building massive facilities, even still now. And China's coming over, and China Floor is coming over, building one in Dalton. So I think, obviously they know that hard surface component is going to continue to drive. So I see the trend, I guess, if I was to try to look at that crystal ball, probably remaining close to the same. We're doing on commercial and on multifamily. Now in the multifamily market, there's even a phrase they built for it called B2R, called build to rent. Forbes magazine, for instance, said the B2R segment of homes right now is one of the fastest growing sectors of the U.S. housing market. I mean, that's how much multifamily, obviously if they're doing that with homes, that means too the multifamily, the condos, the apartments, those are going to continue to do the same. I think we're seeing a big drive toward building rental units.
Yeah. And Tom, I know when we were speaking earlier, you had mentioned some of the upcoming stuff that you think you see coming as far as flooring materials. So what are your thoughts on that? What do you see coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, well, I like to call it the wild in the design arena.
Okay.
I mean, the products just keep getting wilder and wilder as they can be. I mean, there's and I'm not putting down any of these products. It's just unique to see them. You've got carpet tile now with vinyl on top as fibers, but you also have backing showing in carpet tiles now. That was a claim when I worked for a manufacturer. Now it's a design.
Yep.
But the shapes of some of the products, how they're being made now, how they install. A lot of the carpet tiles are actually being installed. You have to use this vinyl principles to install them. So you've got that, and then on the apartments here, in our market, what we're seeing, where apartments were always looking for that value material to put in apartments. They replace it so quick and everything. Now we're seeing some very high-end apartments being built with unbelievable flooring in them and unique shapes. Same with ceramic tile. The shapes and the abstract designs of these ceramic tiles now on walls, trying to figure out how to grout them is a challenge.
And
the cost of grouting them is a challenge. The time is a challenge. So there's just so much that is going to affect how we bid jobs, how we price jobs, whether we make money or not on a job, simply from the changes in products and the design of the products.
So you see that being a huge driver moving through this year, and we'll talk more about that in our next section, which is the keys to success, right? But you, Tom, are predicting that you're seeing that we're going to see a lot more interesting shapes, sizes, colors, designs, and that brings a whole new set of challenges with it, right?
Tom brings a great point. I mean, just tile alone. Used to be when you were putting it on a wall, it was a 1 foot by 1 foot tile. Now it's a 4 foot by 8 foot tile. And if you're bidding
the wall
something
flattened out,
you're not including some air for liability.
They were 4-inch square.
Shame on you. One sheet breaks. And the same on carpet tile. When Tom just mentioned shapes, I mean, you look at carpet tile now, and again, I think we're going to have to come up with a different category. When LVT, and we still call it LVT because it was luxury vinyl tile, now it's LVP. I guess we're going to come up with PTP or CPT. Never mind. Carpet tile is basically now in the shape of a plank, because we're starting to see a lot of that too, and it's adding a whole dimension again to that flooring where they're trying to stay with a soft surface, but we're so much getting away from the broadloom.
You have some very large tile planks out there now too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So where you used to grab a carpet tile and throw it down, now you got to crawl 4 steps to put it in. Crawl back.
Yeah. Well, designers like large format products like that because it just gives it a different look. That's what they're going for. One of the things we see too with the bio. Pardon me.
Mines are beautiful that they're coming out with.
Oh yeah, they're gorgeous, and they're really coming up with some great designs. But when you get into the biosource products and the products that contain post-consumer recycled content, they can actually change the dynamic of the product. It's not just that you're actually improving a product or you're giving the customer a different value. They may be more sensitive to moisture, they may be more sensitive to temperature fluctuations, or they may require specific adhesive types. Some of these products are a little undimensionally stable, so they'll require a semi-wet or wet set installation just to give it more of a permanent installation. So that's where it's really critical for the flooring contractor to know what he's working with, because if he doesn't, it can be expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
And the large
Speaking of adhesive manufacturers, hey Tom, speaking of adhesive manufacturers, I happen to know a good one that could give you some adhesive for that sign behind you because it's falling.
Did it fall?
Oh man, yep. We'll send some right over. So we were talking about flooring materials and trends, and Gary, you were mentioning something about biosourced or post-consumer recycled content.
Yes.
And what I kind of missed the point there because we were talking over ourselves. So do you mind kind of restating that quickly, and then we'll move on?
Yeah, what's happened is a lot of the manufacturers are trying to take the vinyl content out of their LVT products. And what they're trying to do is reduce VOCs, basically. Okay. And they make the products, if they're biosourced, that they're using biosourced polymers, they're trying to make the products more environmentally friendly. They're using renewable resources, or they're using post-consumer content. And these are great products, but they, in some cases, do have different parameters than what we were used to with the vinyl products. And what unfortunately is you really can't look at the product and say, oh yeah, this is definitely biosourced. It's going to look exactly the same as the other products, but it may have different sensitivities to temperature fluctuation, or less sensitivity, honestly, to temperature or moisture fluctuation. So you need to be aware of what you're installing before you start the project.
Right. Yeah, so it will change to Tom's point, it will change the install and the way that job is bid pretty drastically.
Oh yeah.
So be aware, and we'll talk more about that in the keys to.
Hey Gary, just a quick question, and you may or may not have the answer, because obviously with all the new LVTs we've run into just a ridiculous stability issue. Yeah. Would pulling that vinyl out and adding that other component affect the stability of that product because we've got this LVT that's expanding and contracting. You'd think it was a 3/4 inch plywood.
It can, unfortunately. And what I always look at is a lot of times the products they actually have a fiberglass reinforcement layer or multiple layers. The fiberglass reinforcement is going to add cross-plying, and that cross-plying is going to give it dimensional stability. You compare plywood to a solid core product. I mean, you're going to get much more dimensional stability. We'll do a lot of internal testing here for ourselves and also for our customers. We'll do it for distributors and OEM partners, where we'll actually test on our pods. We can replicate a wet slab up to 99% RH, pushing out 25 pounds of vapor emissions. We also have an environmental chamber where we can install. We've done installations for some of our partners at 40 degrees and then raise them up to typical room temperature around 70, 75 degrees, and then bring it up to 120 degrees to see what it does. And then we've also done the opposite. We've installed it at 120 degrees and then drop it down just to see what that floor is going to do. And in some cases they perform just perfectly, in other cases they fail. It just really, according to what usually
Sorry,
happens.
Seth, I didn't mean to turn Gary on there when asking.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was
Just like winding a robot.
I was just about to interrupt myself.
Thanks,
Sorry.
Gary.
But speaking of that, so Tom, let's talk about. So we've talked about changes that you guys think we're going to see in the flooring materials themselves, but let's talk about what that means in the specification world. So what changes do you see coming to the specification process throughout this year?
I think the main things on the specifications, they're just going to continue to be unique to the project instead of the old, boilerplate specifications. The biggest change that we need to see in our industry is people reading those and going by them and pricing the job accordingly. I think that's the biggest change you're going to see. They're going to have to. It's going to become more vital with the new products that we're getting and how they're going to be installed and everything Gary just said there. You better be reading those specs, or you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble.
Sure. And what regulations and compliance stuff do you guys see coming down the line? Is there anything that we should be aware of that we think is going to happen this year or in the near future that's going to change anything about our industry on a large scale?
Hey, I have a feeling that we're going to see more and more regulation. It's just the way life is. And what they're looking for is to protect not only the property owner and the people that are going to inhabit the building. They're trying to protect the floor covering installer, the people that are working with these products every day, which to me means an awful lot. I hate to see installers using products that are eventually going to make them sick down the line.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of articles from some people that I know very well in the industry that have developed health issues because of chemical exposure from products that they dealt with in the past.
Well, and speaking of that,
we're already seeing. Go ahead, Seth.
I was just going to say one of the changes that I think that's kind of in here that we're talking about with different flooring materials, ways to bid things, is in that specification process. Is it true that you guys are starting to see actual labor put into the specification process, saying we require someone that's been CFI certified, or we require someone that's gone through install training, or what does that landscape look like, and what do you guys see happening in the future?
I was just actually going to say that when Gary was stopping there. We are seeing more of that. I know Install does a great job working with them, and Diversify is a big install contractor. So they're looking at working at getting Install into the specifications. We are doing the same with CFI. And I'd say especially the last 6 to 8 months, we are getting more calls here from groups that are saying, hey, we were awarded this project in the specification. It actually calls that we have to have a CFI C2 certified. I think you're going to see that because of the labor shortage. There's a lot of people, and it's literally went up the chain through the architect, even to the design firm, of how much that bad installation has hurt them.
Right.
So I think you're going to see more and more of that going forward, that those specs are going to be calling out for whether it's an install or IUPAT or CFI, or maybe CTE, on the tile side. They are going to start calling out more and more of those certification requirements.
If you said one more acronym, I was going to have to shut you down, Robert. Sorry, Tom. What were you saying?
And we're seeing a lot of that not only in this market but across the nation. Of not only are they recommending or requiring CFI or install, they're also pre-qualifying now. They went that extra step from what they used to do, and now on a lot of national companies and big projects, you have to be install certified, and you have to be pre-qualified before you can even bid that project. Say, I'm sure CFI's probably got some of the same things.
Yeah.
So you are seeing more things going to be coming out in the specs.
Yeah.
So, regulations.
Yeah. So
And
pay
the
attention to that
COVID's
for
going to have
sure.
a big factor on it.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
trend.
Well,
actually.
and speaking of that, guys, I really want to get to our last section because that's where we are going to actually tell our viewers things that they can do to be more successful, whether they're a salesperson in the flooring industry or an installer or an installation manager, an architect, designer. It doesn't matter what you do in flooring. We want to supply tips and ideas and concepts that you can really turn your business on and have a successful 2021. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So what do some of those opportunities look like, right? So when it comes to flooring materials specifically, and we've talked about how they've changed, we've talked about what we see coming along. So when it comes to flooring materials, Gary, what would you recommend as kind of a take-home point that you could say, be sure you do this to make money?
As a flooring contractor, you really almost have to protect the customer from themselves in some cases. Like Tom brought up, a lot of times we're getting all these real, design-oriented products, but they may not be at the performance level for the project you're doing, for instance.
Right.
So consequently, you need to be their eyes and ears in the field, and if that product is not going to perform, you need to have them aware of it so that they can go back to their designer and they can reselect so that they don't put a product in that isn't suitable for their application.
So make sure the boots on the ground are paying attention to what the product is and know what it is.
Yeah.
Tom, can you walk us back a step before that and talk to us about maybe a tip or two on just knowing what products you've got going on in the job and how big of a difference that makes?
I think that's key. I said it earlier, it all starts with selling the job. And you have to know your products in today's market and tomorrow's market. You absolutely have to know what you're working with, how it's made, how it's manufactured, and how it has to be installed. The big two keys to me is the manufacturer and the vendor. We have great vendors out there, and same with the manufacturers. And they're all willing to come in and talk to you and explain all the products to you. And your vendors will come in and provide, the adhesives or the floor preps that you need with those. So that's key to us. We have these guys in here as much as we possibly can. Now, unfortunately, it's all done on Zoom meetings. But we try to learn as much about the products as we possibly can, especially these new ones, because that's going to decide how we price this job. We're all in here to make money. We're in this industry to make money.
Absolutely.
And if it's not bid right, if you don't know what you're actually pricing, it's about impossible to make money in today's market.
Yeah.
You
So,
really
and-
have to know how much.
And Robert, we'll get to you in a minute, but Tom, I'd like to continue that thought when it comes to what products are being specified, and what would you say is a great way to make sure that the products that are going on a job are the ones that you want to see, are ones that you can be profitable on?
Well, our way of doing that is we try to build relationships with the architects and designers as well. When we have a big project coming up, if we can get in that job early and have some input on what's being specified, that helps us out tremendously. We'll work with the designer. We'll talk about what designer wants a flooring contractor messing with their design. But
Right.
if you have a good relationship with them, you can actually have some input on what they're going to use or how they're going to use it or where they're going to use it.
So Tom, how,
Designers are all out for that look. They
Yeah.
need our assistance and will it work or not.
so you're saying if I'm a flooring contractor, I should know my architects, my designers, get in touch with them and talk to them about product. How far ahead of the game are we talking about? Are we talking about 2 months before a project goes in, or 2 years?
These bigger projects, it's definitely years in advance. So if you've got a good relationship with that architect or designer, they'll contact you and say, hey, look, we're working on IU Hospital. It's a $4 billion project. We'd like to meet with you, talk to you about some products. Or,
Right.
Is it okay if I call you and ask you, for some advice? So typically what we'll do is we'll set up meetings with some of our vendors, some of our manufacturers, and we'll set up meetings with the architects and designers, maybe not even knowing about a job, just to meet with them. And it really goes over great. The manufacturer's showing the products, but typically the majority of the time spent is talking to us about installation.
Yeah.
In sundry.
Yeah, and that's exactly where you want to be. So that is a great tip. And if you are listening, I encourage you, if that's something you can apply to your business, start doing it now for sure. Thank you, Tom. And then, Robert, did you have anything to add on specifications? I know you've talked about that as well before.
Well, both Tom and Gary did a great job. I think, there again, research. You got to research those products. You need to know so many things anymore, because when Tom's putting a bid together on a particular project, he's putting a portion for labor. If they don't fully know what the cost of getting that product installed is going to be, and they just put a blanket price they always put in for that particular category, suddenly they could get into product and it could take them twice the labor to get it installed. So the cost, the adhesive, the moisture tolerance, as far as, requirements for those products, you got to do your research. Because Tom says, know your products, but there's so many new products coming out to where, no, I don't think anybody's going to know them all.
And
but,
we're forecasting that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
We know what's going to happen.
There again, like Tom said, call the rep, the manufacturer, the tech guys, you can get all that. And I'm going to stress, which both of you already did, how important and how the benefits of getting involved on the front end of the specification. I mean, that puts you literally in the driver's seat. You with the manufacturer, in a partnership with the manufacturer whose product you spec. I mean, yeah, huge benefit.
And Tom, just
days
really quick.
of pricing $3 a yard's over. Some people have done it forever. We charge $3 a yard for installing for labor for carpet tile. Yeah, that's over with. It's just too difficult anymore. It's too complex.
Yeah. And Tom, when you were speaking earlier, you had mentioned something about a specific product that I think you guys have bid a job on. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a carpet tile job that was bid like a carpet tile job, and when they got out to the site, that carpet tile was a little different than you expected, right?
Yes, it was installed like a vinyl. It looked like a vinyl. It felt like a vinyl.
Looks like.
It came from a carpet manufacturer, and it was carpet tile. And I didn't look at the fiber, what it was made out of. I didn't dig deep enough because it looked like a basic carpet tile from a regular manufacturer we sell all the time. And it kind of bit us a little bit. Fortunately, we got it done good, but I had to go out there. I mean, my ISM, he called me on it, which is my installation supervisor. He's like, "You're not going to believe this stuff."
Yeah. So when we talk about the importance of knowing what product is going in, it sounds simple, but sometimes it's not as simple as you would think. So be sure you're involved in that specification process. Sorry?
We actually brought the manufacturer's tech rep out because it was new to me. I was pretty confident we could get it in and everything, but he came out at 7:30 in the morning. We wanted to know exactly what we had to do to this to make sure we was doing it, per their specs. That's one thing. We do everything per manufacturer's recommended procedures. And since this was new to us and he was close, we had him come out and go through everything for us. So we was confident, we wasn't going to come back on this thing.
So there's another great tip right there. And
I was going to say the same thing, Seth. I think that particular segment, guys are not utilizing it enough. I mean, by that I mean in both installers and retailers, dealers. Because I don't care what the product is, whether it's adhesive, you got Gary, whether it's a prep product with Ardex or Shernox or any of them, whether it's your Shaws, all of them have a tech department, and why more people don't utilize that tech department instead of just out there guessing is beyond me. So that's what they're there for. Use Gary.
Yep.
And that's the other thing on your specification. Real quick on the specifications, I mentioned that you can find a special spec section now for prep, moisture mitigation. All those specs, flooring protection's a big one. if you're on a big project and you miss that little thing in there that's at the end of each spec that says you have to cover that floor and protect it during construction, that is a lot of money on a big job, a lot of money in material and labor.
Yes.
And it also might say that you have to maintain that protection until they open. That about triples that amount of money.
Wow.
Because the plumbers and electricians are going to tear it up all throughout the project. And you're responsible for fixing that and maintaining it.
Sure.
So the spec sections are just so important
Oh yeah.
to be able to come in under budget for that.
I had a spec on a sheet vinyl product that you actually had to protect it from direct sunlight during the acclimation process, during the installation process, and for 72 hours after installation. And this particular floor failed because they had all of these open windows that faced east, and they just got a lot of direct sunlight. And they didn't read it, they didn't read the specification before they started, and had a lot of problems with the floor because of it.
So
Most contractors are going to look at it and say, well, that's not my problem, until someone reads that spec section to them.
It's in their installation instructions. You have to read the installation instructions. We read them all the time. I mean, that's what we do. We go through installation instructions.
we write them occasionally too.
We write a lot of those too. In some cases, we help our customers, our OEM partners, write their specs just to be safe, so that they don't have any issues.
Let me see here. I'm just getting a note about our text service. I think it's still down, but
Just give me your phone number, Seth. They can do you.
yeah. Let me do
Call
that
after midnight. That's always the best time.
Okay. Well, we will still check. It looks like their service is still down, but we'll still check and see. We might be able to capture a couple before we end here, but we do have a few more minutes, and I definitely want to talk about some of these other areas and keys to success that we can give these guys. So when it comes to, we've talked about flooring materials, what you can do there, specification process, but there's a lot that can be done just with the changes that have happened that we talked about earlier in chemistry and technology of floor prep products and adhesives.
Yeah.
So Gary, do you mind talking a little bit about the importance of, now we know the importance of the flooring product, right?
Yeah.
But how does that interact with the importance of choosing the right prep products or adhesives?
It's absolutely critical. And if you look at a lot of the instructions, there's a lot of manufacturers that are producing, maybe a high moisture tolerant floor covering. And the adhesive is high moisture tolerant, but you can't use a patch below it that isn't moisture tolerant. So we run into situations that, making certain that all of those components are going to meet the criteria that you have to have.
Right.
Some manufacturers are going to only recommend going over a high moisture tolerant Portland-based patch. Most manufacturers don't like gypsum products unless they're over a gypsum substrate or over a plywood substrate. So you have to make certain that the products that you're using, the components that go into it, are all suitable. And if you read their technical data sheet, it will be in there. All of the information will be there.
Yeah. So I guess the upshot of all of this, right, is read,
And then read and double check.
read a little bit more. Make sure you know what's going on. And then Robert, do you mind talking about some of the ways? I guess Robert and Tom, either of you, some of the ways that we can combat, or that we are combating, that you could recommend other people with the labor shortage. So Tom and Robert, I feel like you guys both have some input there, but what can people do when they're trying to, they're talking to architects, they're doing all the right things, they're making sure the right products are being specified that they want to install, and they've got their profit margin built in, and then it comes down to it and they need someone to install it. So what tips would you give?
Tom, you got any?
Well, with us, we're just continuing to try to bring more young people into the industry. As a flooring contractor and as a president association, we all work together in Indianapolis to try to bring in young men and women into this industry and get them trained. You've just got to go out and do it. We go to the state fair, put booths up. We go any big function that we can and try to bring them in here and get them trained. The key to that is keeping them busy. Once you get them into the industry, you got to keep them busy.
So you're not just putting ads on Craigslist. You're actually going and setting up booths and being active in recruiting new installers into the field.
Yes, So we're talking to them about the benefits of the flooring, and you know, I talked to them personally about the people I looked up to when I was younger, and see what kind of living they made.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a good industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, Seth, we're a 27-year-old association, and the International Certified Floor Coverage Installer Association, and 27 years ago we started out training and certifying. I would say about 5 years ago we realized that the bodies we were training were all over 50. The guys coming in for certification, again, they were up there. So we started realizing we needed to add another category, and that was obviously the recruiting point. And we too, we're doing programs now that we're mixing with high schools out of Georgia. We're doing our Build My Future Flooring Edition campaign, which is a big show we do every year. But the recruiting point is absolutely critical in order to work with groups like the Floor Covering Education Foundation and others to bring the youth into our trade.
Yeah.
Now, you had said you've gotten this job and you got to man it. The only tip I can give you, because I can tell you right now, if there's an installer knocking on your door, there's probably a reason why he's knocking on your door, and he's probably not the one you want to hire. Because any of the guys that are the professionals in this industry, believe me, they're working all they want to work. The only way you typically can find one is if he's somewhere working that they're not taking care of him. And it amazes me that in the environment we have right now, that some installers are still being abused as badly as they are, from the standpoint of back charging and pricing, and we won't even get into that. But there are guys there that unfortunately, I did a session, an open session there was about 4 of us on stage, and one of them was a big retailer, and he said, I don't have any installer issues. And the audience asked him, well, wait a minute, where are you getting them? He flat out told them, I steal them. Bottom line, he said his salespeople, his people, they go into distributors. If they're driving down the road, they are told to, and they see a flooring truck or job site, go in there, talk to them, find out where they're from, see if they're happy where they're at. And he basically, his active campaign is stealing. It's very unfortunate for the environment that we're in, the crisis, I call it. Some people don't want to use that word, but I do, because when you look at the age of the installation group versus the industry and the growth it expects and needs to make, yeah, it's a crisis.
So
you've got to treat your installers well. There's no doubt about it. Train them.
The way I would look at
them.
Yep.
Is you really need to, think about yourself as a farmer. You're going to be planting seeds. Go to the high schools, like Robert said, and it should be the individual flooring contractors. You can go hire young people that are on the fence about going to college. They really don't know what they want to do. They really prefer to work with their hands. And you can actually maybe bring them into an apprenticeship program in your company, train them, and then as they work up from helpers, then get their CFI certification or install certification so that they have their credentials. And you can actually start to breed people like that. When I had my retail stores, there were some of my best installers were guys that started out just as helpers working for us. They had no installation experience. We trained them, and they ended up being just phenomenal installers.
Yep. And we're coming up on our... We're coming up on our time here, guys, but I do want to open it up just for a moment. We still don't have any ability to take questions, and I really apologize for that. If you want anyone viewing, you can submit questions to tech@Taylor Adhesives or marketing@tayloradhesives.com. You can send those in via email. I just want to apologize. Again, thank you for putting that up there. So send your questions to tech@tayloradhesives.com. Or you can still text them in, and they may show up at some point. But before we end, I do want to open it up just for a moment here while we've got these guys on the line, and talk about other ways that we can ensure that you can ensure that you're being successful as we move through 2021. So we obviously know COVID came in 2020 and changed a lot of things. Some of them for the worst, definitely, but some of them possibly for the better. So what does that look like when we're talking about moving forward, when we now are doing everything via Teams, Microsoft Teams, or Zoom, or staying in touch with your employees, staying in touch with your customers? Tom, do you mind talking a little bit about that and give some advice to our viewers on how to manage through COVID, because it's not going away right now?
No, and it hit us so fast and kind of took us by surprise, and we had to send everybody home to work remotely. And now it's to the point where who knows how long this is going to continue. The more you read, the worse you feel about this stuff. So we was very fortunate. We had just put in place a innovative digital platform and had national networking tied in with that. So I think, the flooring industry has been high tech for quite a while now, and it just continues to get high tech, and we have to follow that trend. So I can get up every morning with our platform, and I can see what every one of my salespeople are doing, what they're bid, what they haven't bid, where they're at with each one of those bids, what they've been successful on, what they haven't, what they need help on. So we've had a tremendous year in 2020, and I don't know how we could have done it without this digital platform that we have. But the other part of that was staying in contact with your team, letting them, because working from home can be very difficult. Some people absolutely love it; they're there by themselves.
Hey, Tom, we lost your audio.
Yeah,
It can be very, very difficult for them to work from home, with family issues and family members getting COVID, then getting it themselves. It just really got tough for a while. But what we did was, and what I did was, we kept in constant contact with them. The Zoom calls and the Teams calls, we all got tired of that, but they do have an effect. They do. You can let people know you care, you're working with them, you're there to help them, and just keeping them fired up. I think one of the biggest things I notice is we have a culture here, and we all try to work to the same goals, and that trickles down from corporate to the branches. You lose that culture when you're not working together, when you don't have that interaction together. And that's been the hardest thing for me, is to keep that going. But we've managed to do it. I think it's going to get even harder the longer this goes. But you've got to be focused on what you're doing and where you want to get. One thing we realized early was companies that pushed really hard to get through this and come out the other side with a big backlog in business was going to survive. And my team really stepped up and did that. But I think it's just all because of the communication we kept during this process.
Hey, Tom, this is Robert. I got a question for you. And actually, you and I kind of spoke briefly about this yesterday. But I think it's so important for our listeners that are in the commercial business, because, I see groups that are just so bid driven. Everything's just all about price. And it's so, they just bid 5, 6, 8 projects a day, and it's all on price. So if I were to ask you, put them into the category of the most important, and I gave you relationship, price, and reputation, how would you see them in the order of importance?
Relationship, reputation, and then price. And that's been another part of what we've done all year, is we've kept in touch with our vendors. I probably felt more sorry for them than anybody. Our vendors and our manufacturers, they live by going out and talking and selling and communicating, and they've been locked down tight. And they're miserable. They're just absolutely miserable.
All those memes you see about check in on your extrovert friends,
Especially even Tom's branch. I won't have him spew out the numbers he's done, but he's, like the top performing. So obviously they're doing something right, meaning the philosophy they have in-house is working for them, and they're staying busier than they want to be. So that's why I asked that question. I think it's important for a lot of people to understand how important that relationship piece is.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't get no jobs without our vendors and our vendor partners and our manufacturing relationships and stuff. But one thing I'll say, and I think it's going to become more and more important as we go through COVID and even after COVID, who knows what the new norm's going to be. But I think as a flooring contractor, you have to have a plan. You have to have a plan, and you have to have a process to follow your plan and to make sure your team's following your plan. I've always said success builds success, So you have to track what you're doing. You have to monitor what you're doing, and you have to stay focused on that plan. one of the biggest things I think that flooring contractors make a mistake on, and especially during COVID, what we got away from is if you look at just bidding everything out there, just throwing numbers at everything out there and hoping you get something. If you add up the resources you use and the money you spent just on the jobs you lost, it's phenomenal. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's for all of us.
Yeah.
So,
Got to get focused.
so guys, thank you so much. I hate to cut it short here, but we're already a few minutes over, and we took no questions. So clearly, we had plenty to talk about today, which is good. But I think the upshot of this is do your research, know your products, stay in touch with your architects, designers, work on those relationships with everyone, with the sales reps, with the architects, and almost more importantly is your own company. Make sure that you're building life into your employees, making sure that they know that you care about them, that they know that they have a safe place with you. And I think that's what's going to get us all through this together and build a successful 2021. So thank you guys so much for your help, your input, your advice. Again, sorry we couldn't do live questions, but like I said, we have plenty to talk about. So Robert, just want to thank you for being here and thank you for your time.
Always.
Tom, same to you. Thank you so much for joining us today and really appreciate all of the insights that you've given us. Gary, thanks for being with us here in studio.
Always happy to be here.
And we'll definitely see you again next month.
Sounds good.
I'm just kidding. I'll see you before that. But we do want to remind you guys, be sure to connect with us on social media. Follow us and like us, see what we're up to. Also, please do plan to attend our next Taylor Time Live, which, let me pull that up. That's February 16 at 11 a.m. We will continue the conversation on the insider's view for commercial, builder, and multifamily. So you are not going to want to miss it. We will release details shortly of who we will have talking about that and what we'll be discussing. But make plans to join us. Download our app and contact us at any point. Gary and his team are always happy to take questions. And just remember, until next time, we're Taylor Adhesives, and we're with you every